Hi, I'm Mark Nelson from the Alley Recording Company.
And I'm Scott Fritz from Stranded on a Planet. Today on the top shelf, we're at the Chicago Recording Company in downtown Chicago, and we're going to be listening to the Bricasti M7 stereo reverb processor. Over the last 10 years, the M7's become somewhat of a modern-day classic, and for good reason. I've had one for a couple of years, and the level of depth and clarity in the reverbs, in my experience, is unparalleled in the digital world. We're also going to be speaking with Casey from Bricasti, one of the designers of the unit, and he's going to give us some tips and tricks while we record Sarah Marie Young and her band using 3 M7s and an M10 remote, so we can hear how using multiple reverbs on one mix can give an even greater sense of depth. Let's check it out.
About 12 years ago, I had the pleasure of starting my career at CRC, known for decades as the largest and most successful recording facility in the Midwest. CRC's vast clientele ranges from Michael Jackson to Smashing Pumpkins, Sting to Pearl Jam, Wilco to Coldplay. Today we'll be in Studio 5, using only the dead room so we have complete control over the space and the reverb.
So we're here with Casey Dowdell from Bricasti. Thanks for coming, Casey.
Hey, love it.
And so before Bricasti, what were you doing?
I had worked for Hewlett-Packard for many years doing graphic chip design, and I went into the medical industry and did a lot of ultrasound systems, so you may have used some of my technology if you've ever looked at your baby before it was born. So that was a really great experience, but when I had the chance to go work at Lexicon, I jumped at that because what a great gig, you know, terrific company, a lot of great people there. And eventually I decided to move on. I was actually listening one day in a sound room to one of the old Death Cab for Cutie, their old DIY albums, and that guy could just hit that snare. And I heard that, and it was, I think, you know, there was no reverb on it, but it was recorded in a great space, like a barn or something like that. And I just said, you know, really, there aren't reverbs out there that can do that type of sound. And
Like
I really
a
wanted
room duplicated sound, not just a processed reverb.
So it was that sort of sent me, and the next day I thought about it, I talked to my wife, came in, and I wrote up my resignation letter, and as it turned out that day, all of the managers that I could resign to were at an offsite, so I had to wait an extra day. So I came in, and, you know, so that was kind of the story of the beginning.
You know, a couple people were asking this question, which is, maybe you can explain a little bit about the mathematical design process of the M7.
Yeah, wow, jumping right into it. Well, right in. You know, you're right, there's a lot that goes into it, and when I set out to develop this reverb, I kind of had a box full of tools that I was aware of, that all of the reverbs that I knew of had been built on this kit, this little toolbox. I knew that in order to advance the art, which I really desperately wanted to do, that I had to build a new toolkit, and that took a lot of thinking and going down different paths that some bore fruit and some did not. But ultimately I hit on an idea that I thought had a lot of promise. And I say it that way because I'm not the type that sits down and listens to things and decides or looks at waveforms. In fact, before, I had never seen the waveforms coming out of a Bricasti until I saw them published in a magazine someplace, you know. So it's, my whole way of working is thought experiments, coming up with these ideas. And it was literally maybe 2.5 years into the process before I ever heard the first reverb from the result, you know, that resulted from these thought experiments. The toolkit evolved, and I was able to put them together in ways that really are unique, haven't been done before in reverb, and that's why the M7 is unique in its own way. But one of the interesting things that I recall from the development was I started out on a laptop that is, you know, maybe about 1/20th the performance of what most school kids go to school with today. So it was, what, 7 or 8 years ago, longer than that I started the development of this. And I knew that in order to implement the ideas that I had, I needed to create a set of numbers that were used in the underlying algorithm. And these numbers were created offline. They're not created when you turn the reverb on. They were actually created on this laptop. And it took me 3 years from the time that I said go to when those numbers were actually finished and were calculated. And so today, I mean, I think you could do it in, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, which is still a lot of time and it still would make an interesting story. But the fact that it was 3 years I thought was very interesting. And you look at it, and that's even using some of the really great tools that we have today, you know, that we can put to bear to solve these types of problems. But it's those kinds of things. It's the thought experiments. It's the implementation of you know, things that really hadn't been done before. And you know, the hearing was just the icing on the cake. In fact, we went to an AES show, and I had only heard it for about a week before that, but I had never heard it out in a real space. I had heard it just in my studio. I put some headphones on at the studio, and somebody was plugging a jack into the back of our little demo unit, and I was hearing just that, you know, the sound of a jack being plugged in, right? And I was listening on the headphones, and I thought, okay, what I was hearing was actually the sound of somebody with a jackhammer. Like, I was visioning that maybe somebody had to put up something at the trade show and they were using a jackhammer on the concrete floor. And I took the headphones off and I literally asked, I hope, just making a joke, I hope they stop that jackhammering before the show starts. And they said, what? You know? And it was then that I knew, man, if you could fool yourself, that's really great. You know, you can add some space to a sound. And I was blown away by that. I said, I never really said anything to them at the time, but I just said to myself, wow, I love it.
Did something right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I remember when I first met you at AES a couple years ago, you told me that each preset actually contains 10 different reverbs.
Yeah, well, in the strictest sense, that's true, and it's not that it's 10 channels or anything. It's that you have, out of your stereo returns, a lot of people have talked about layering. If you read the forums, they say layering reverbs. I like this one with this one and that. But with the M7, it sort of does its own layering. So there's 4 reverbs that really are generating the tail. There are 4 reverbs that are generating the reflections that are more distinct sounds within the earlier portion, typically, of the reverb. And then there are actually 2 other reverbs that are for very low frequency sounds. So very low frequency is a tough thing to get right with traditional techniques. And I came up with just a very different idea for what I wanted to do for low frequency. So there's anything, it's a very steep filter, and it's around 125 hertz. So everything below 125 hertz has its own separate reverb that is used. So all of them can be adjusted separately from the late to the early, but you can also adjust that very low frequency reverb called the VLF control. And we need to look at that when we demo it, because it's very interesting, and you wouldn't think that there would be much reverb or even use for reverb, because you think of it as being mud. But if you handle it correctly, it can be a really useful tool. So we should look at that.
Let's go upstairs to Studio 5 and take a listen to the 3M7s.